Yeah.
Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Ihsan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And this is episode 99 of the podcast, and it's January 11th, 2023, as we record this. Our main topic is overthinking your writing, which I'm surprised we haven't talked about before, actually.
Right. We've alluded to it the whole time, but now we're going to actually tackle it.
We had a comment from the tarot episode. I forget what number it was. Mary said she was so inspired by our discussion that she went and ordered Wisdom of the Oracle cards.
Cool.
By I can't even pronounce it. Colette Baron-Reid, I think is the name. She had one of her decks years ago, and she really liked the illustrator's artwork. So, as far as announcements go, I still am trying to help a woman look for a shared retreat ticket participant. She bought the shared ticket at $650, which includes all the food and lodging, instruction, retreat, coaching, all of that. And so she needs another female to share lodging with her. So yeah, email me, valerie@valerieihsan.com, to ask any questions or get the PayPal link for the shared retreat ticket if you are interested in coming to the retreat in August 24th through the 27th. Yeah, we'll be talking about book structure, story hypothesis, plotting that doesn't hurt, author action plans, and more. The patron price is $775, and right now the early bird price is available until the end of this month, and that is $800. And monthly payment plans are an option. Keep sending us topic suggestions, guys. I'm liking what I'm hearing, and we're going to do... Eric and I are going to have a meeting one of these weeks coming up where we plan out the topics for the rest of the year, probably, or at least the quarter. So get your ideas in, and
unless
we'll
we've run out
them.
of things to talk about, unless there's nothing else to talk about in writing.
I don't think that's true.
Okay, as long as that's not the case, I think we'll do that.
So let me tell you about my week.
Okay. Drum roll, everybody. Drum rolls.
I'm kind of I consider myself a spiritual person. I consider myself I always feel a little bit weird about saying intuitive, but that's how I make a lot of my decisions, is just sort of checking in and the gut check.
Right.
And so I've been thinking about this short story for months and months and months. And I think, since about August or September is when I've been like, all right, I'm going to write this short story for this anthology. Okay, I'm going to write this short story for this anthology. I really want to be in this anthology. I have to come up with a short story. Okay, I came up with an idea. I plotted out the idea, and it's been on my to-do list for months. And as you know, I believe that if something is on your to-do list like 3 weeks in a row, then you need to check in and see, like, why is this still here? Is it too big of a, chunk? Like, do I need to break this down, or do I just not want to do it?
Right.
So
or are you overthinking it? Stay tuned, folks. Maybe she's overthinking it. Okay.
Maybe I was. So I've decided yesterday, as I was journaling in the morning as part of my morning ritual, that I didn't want to write a short story. I don't know how to write short stories. I've never written a short story. I mean, I played with one like 25 years ago or something, but I don't, that's not a genre that I know how to write. And to try to write it and edit it and turn it into the anthology in the next 2 weeks was ludicrous. And my wheelhouse is memoir, short form, so when I'm thinking of the short form, it's the personal essay, it's a memoir. So I thought, well, months ago I did have an idea for an essay that was sort of bookstore related, because that's the theme of the entries. And but I didn't want to write it because it put somebody in a bad light. And as a memoir writer, you kind of have to take that into account. If you want to write about your mom and she's still alive, What's your relationship like? Like, you have to kind of
What do
check
you want that
in.
relationship to be when you're done?
Right? Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
part of the memoir process. So I had decided at that time, months ago, that I wasn't going to write it because of that. So while journaling this morning or yesterday morning, I thought, you know what? I can change some of the aspects. I can make it a different person. It's not a different person. One of my lines in the sand when it comes to memoir is I can't make a composite character, but I can change a name. I can change,
Sure.
if I want to like protect the identity of somebody, then I can change a name or a job.
Right.
I don't, for memoir, change gender, but that's my line in the sand. That's
Sure.
my personal. So
And I would guess every memoir person needs to have that line.
that line in the sand, yeah, you need to kind of decide what your
Yeah.
rules are when it comes to truth telling in memoir. So I wrote the essay in my journal as I was sitting on the couch. I wrote it all yesterday, the whole
Wow.
thing. It's done. After
Wow.
months of having the short story be on my list, I wrote the essay in one morning. So that feels really good and is a
Bravo. I
reminder
love it. I
that I
love
need
it.
to just lean into my own wheelhouse, lean into what
Right.
feels good, trust my intuition. So yeah,
I got a little nervous when you started that update with I don't like to call myself a spiritual person, or however you started that. I thought, oh my gosh, where are we going here? I felt like I was getting on skis on a black diamond, like, okay, I don't know how to handle. I don't know where I'm going here. I
What's
like
gonna
that.
happen?
My philosophy on short stories, everybody get ready to write down. I think you have to there has to be your way in, right? Like
Yeah.
every story that you come up with could become, like, if you don't rein it in or you don't contain it, it could become a novel. It could become a full memoir. It could become a full bigger something. You have to have the way into making it a short story. Like what are you going to do to make it shorter? And if you don't, if you don't have that, then I think you've got to, you either have to move on or find a different way to look at it. And I think, you could have probably beat your head on the desk forever. That's great. Great. You found your way in.
Well,
A
my
different
way in was I didn't write it.
Well, you wrote it in the way you knew how, right? So like, I think that counts too. If I have in my head what I think is as a short story and it's just not working, like then my way into it that story isn't as a short story. It's as, maybe it's a short script, or maybe it's a scene in something. I don't know. I think your way in has to include like changing what it is too. I don't know. Short stuff. I think I should have said
Okay.
my on short writing, you have
I
to have
see.
a
A way in. Yeah, and I don't want to give up on trying short stories. I like the idea. Like this year, I would like to play in that genre sandbox, for a little bit and see what
it's a fun one.
happens. But
It's a fun one.
yeah, I think it could be for me too. But yeah, I just couldn't. I didn't have time to play in the sandbox before going to Costa Rica.
Right.
That's what
Well,
it
I
boiled
think
down to.
every story needs to like unlock itself. And I think if, it unlocked for you, you did it all very naturally. That's great.
Yeah.
Bravo. When will we see this story?
Thank you. Well, I'm the call for submissions deadline is February 1st. So, it might not even make it to the to the after all that it might not even make it into the anthology, but I wanted to submit it. So if I get to be in this anthology, that would be really cool and fun.
I hope so. I hope you do.
Thanks. What are you reading? What's your update?
What am I reading? Well, I'm still reading The Only Good Indians. I haven't finished that book yet, partly because I walked into the library with an open mind.
Something jumped the stack.
Well, there was this book of short stories. Actually, it's sitting right here. It's called Heroic Hearts. It's just like a collection of urban fantasy stories. And there was a Jim Butcher story. Jim Butcher is the author of the Dresden Files, which I've been reading. So I picked that up, and then I read, probably half the short stories in there. So yeah, the only Good Indians is fantastic. It's a really great book, but
Is it a thriller or is it a mystery?
it's a horror story. Um, I always get really sort of uncomfortable calling, like, horror is such an odd genre because it's either like, I hate to use highbrow, right? But there's sort of like, there's highbrow horror. This is a story about Native Americans. It deals a lot with Native American life. It's culturally aware. It reads like a Sherman Alexie story, or a Tommy Orange story. It reads like one of like a really serious literary Native American story, but it's got horror elements in it. So it's not like your, B movie
I
slasher
think,
style.
well, I think literary horror is a new genre. In the
Yeah,
last
I
10
think so.
years or so, it's become a thing. So,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah,
would
I
call
think,
this literary horror then?
yeah, I would say it's literary horror. And a lot of my friends who are horror readers, I'm thinking of one person in particular who reads nothing but horror. He didn't like it because he said it was just too literary for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, and that's good. I actually posted about this book on Facebook, and a lot of the people that I saw comment on it and said they'd read it and loved it were not people that are genre fans. They're fans. They're more literary fans. And
Maybe I'll check it out then. Because I
it's
like all
just,
of those things that you mentioned too. I
yeah,
am really drawn to Native stories. In fact, in the last year, I read 4 or 5 of them, some of them memoir, but yeah.
right. Did you watch the Hulu series Reservation Dogs?
I have seen several of the episodes. I haven't like watched all of them.
I love that aesthetic, that just like life on the reservation has a certain feel to it.
Mhm.
In Sherman Alexie stories too, and I bring him up because he's sort of like the luminary Native American author, and I just like that feel. I've actually been on a few reservations, and it's like, it's a feel like there's definitely a cultural difference there. It's,
Mhm.
this is what we've done to
Mhm.
Native Americans, and I think he captured, Stephen Graham Jones captures that feeling, but also adds a terror to it that's outside. That's really cool. So check that book out. And also, if
Cool.
you like urban fantasy, this is a great anthology of stories. It's really fun. There's a bunch of fun
Heroic
stories in it.
Hearts.
Yeah. And
Are you
then
still reading The Farthest Shore with Elijah?
yeah, we're still working on it. It's been a couple of weird weeks for us reading. I normally read to him like 5 nights a week, but it's just not, we haven't had a chance lately. So, but we will be picking that back up today. He keeps asking about it. He
Mhm.
keeps asking. He's got a favorite character in it, and it's really cool because the main character changes from the first 3 books. He's a young man, a middle-aged man, and an old man, and so he's always asking these questions. Well, what happened to him between these books? What happened to him between these stories? And I keep saying, like, hey reader, that's your imagination. That's the
Uh-huh.
fun of this stuff, right? You get to fill in those gaps. So it's so great. It's so great that we're reading fun books. So,
Yeah.
and
I jumped the stack on my reading.
ah,
So I am reading an arc actually called London Seance Society. It's by the same author. I think it's Sarah Penner, I think is her name. And she's the same author from The Lost Apothecary, which I read and enjoyed. So,
hmm.
and I'm really getting into this book. I'm really liking it a lot. So I think it'll be one that will elicit I'm gonna buy the hardcover when it comes out
Oh, wow.
because I like it enough to have it in my collection, and I really like hardcover collections, which is
Hmm.
doesn't bode well for moving to another country. I'm gonna have a slew of
That's so
heavy
funny.
books to
We are
bring with
talking
me.
about like buying a new house and moving, and the I look at it like, yes, all these books. Oh,
There's room for more books.
there's room. Well, that's the other thing. Like, there's the bottleneck between all the books I have now, and then I have to move them, but get to a bigger house. So like, I just have to get through that, like, that journey. And I'm sure not all of these books will make it, and some of them will be left in little libraries across Southeast Portland. So I wish I had as profound a writer update as you,
Mhm.
but I don't.
Well, that
I
was the
am,
only thing I got accomplished. So
well, hey,
I was
that's
kind of
big.
struggling. I'm like, "Oh, I have nothing to say for this while I was writing up the notes earlier this week, but ta-da!
Those getting unstuck from those things that you have in your to-do list are, that's almost as great as like finishing something. Like, you can, like, reconciliation of a stuck item.
It's like
That's
the bottleneck you just said,
right.
get through the
Yeah, you got through. Um, Well, I guess I've sort of done something on a very minor scale. Like I have a Patreon release in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from yesterday. And so I did a lot of the graphics. I did some of the social media graphics, made some decisions on how I'm going to cover each of the stories. I don't want to spend $200 a month doing covers until I'm making $200 a month. So I designed some covers. I'm not a great cover designer, but they'll do for these for the time being. So I did some social media graphics. So I've been loving using the professional Canva because
Yay, you did.
I
You
made the
went with
leap.
that $12 leap.
Hey, like $12 times 100 adds up. Sometimes I feel like I have more $12 subscriptions than I can.
I know. I was thinking like, which ones can I get rid of this year?
I actually I'm doing that, scrutinizing the business bank account statements now, because it's like, really, do I need this? And I'm working on the cookie, the giveaway story that I'm going to start marketing to my lists, to list building with. I'm excited about it. Actually, I imagined it as a 20,000 word story. It's about 20,000 words, so that makes me feel good. So
your intuitive powers at work.
Yeah, it was one of those incomplete stories. It was going to be a subplot, and then when I looked at it, I kept thinking, yeah, this just doesn't fit the subplot anymore. It's just maybe a subplot that had to go die. But now it will be the cookie. It will be the story that everybody, hopefully everybody downloads, reads, and then ends up buying books as a result of. So yeah, it's a good one. Involves a school teacher.
Nice.
And a time capsule.
I can't wait to read it.
And a murder. You'll be probably the next person to read it, actually. I don't know.
Am I reading it in April or March? March?
March. Can you read it before then? We'll have this conversation off air.
Okay. All right. Shall we get into the topic?
Let's do it.
Let's not overthink it.
Let's not overthink it.
That's awesome. We said that at the same time.
And we're both getting into the segues here. It's working.
You're teaching me.
You're catching segue fever. Here's where my mind was when I introduced this topic to you, and I very distinct moment. So I have, in my writer business, I do a lot of outlining. I do a lot of story crafting for people. It's like kind of my recent string of projects have been, I'm hired by producers or directors or people who like, hey, I have this idea. Here's my one page on it. Help me make an outline. So basically I do brainstorming for a lot of people. And I love it because it's I love the inspiration part of writing, and I usually can come up with really good ideas, really kind of outside the box ideas for clients. And so I love it. I never feel like I'm selling my last idea. I used to fear that, but I don't fear that anymore. But what I've noticed is that I'll sit down and say, like, I'm doing some client work. I'm going to do some client work. I'm brainstorming on this idea. I'm going to come up with stuff for the script. And there's sometimes where I can sit down, I can set myself aside like 2 or 3 hours. Like, I'm going to do this. This is my afternoon. I'm going to do this. And I can sit down sometimes and get all of that inspiration work done in like a half an hour or 45 minutes. Like that inspiration comes and it takes. It just takes it, it really hits, and I get some great ideas. But I have this overthinking part of my process sometimes where that sort of worker bee in me says, all right, you set aside 3 hours, but you came up with all these great ideas in 1 hour, and you actually did all the work you need to do in 1 hour. What do you do now? And there's the
celebrate.
Well,
do a little dance.
You're getting to the end of the conversation. I think sometimes like that overthinking is like, especially when you're writing in a limited amount of time, is if you've accomplished what you've set out to do, don't overthink that, right? If you said, I've got the house to myself for 3 hours, this is the time I'm going to write. but you really knock out like 1,000, let's say you knock out that word goal in an hour. I think it can really be counterintuitive to turn into go from the go to that worker bee place where you're like, okay, well, now I still have 2 hours. I can push it to 2 or 3 or 4. I can keep going past that point of inspiration. And I think that can really set you back. And I've noticed that in my own work where I'll get to that place. Like I will come up with, this is what I'm going to send to the client. This is what they've asked for. And they've been happy with it, but pushing past it, thinking like, oh, but I've got to fill the time. I've got to turn this into a work thing, can really be counterintuitive. I think it forces this sort of overthinking of your own inspiration. Do you ever feel like that you sell short like the fact that your job is outcome based as a writer? Sometimes it's outcome based.
Sell short. Say that last line again. Sell short my.
Let me rephrase that. Like, do you feel sometimes like that the need to work and fill the space takes over where like good creativity was when good creativity was done? Like, you're done, your best creative time is done. You should be happy with it. But the need to work pushes you to like, oh, I'm going to keep going. Then you get frustrated because you're sitting there going, why is nothing else coming? And it's like your brain, your body, your core has given you what you needed. I just think it's sometimes you got to know when to put the pen down and you got to stop. You got to say, okay, I got it today and I'm done.
So I haven't had that experience exactly. And I think it's because my creative time is so limited that there isn't like a big swath of time that I'm like, oh, I should fill this with writing. It's more like, okay, I have an hour. What can I get done in an hour? And I usually don't get as much done as I want to. So I don't often have that feeling you're describing. My overthinking comes, I think, with when I am either editing for a client and I'm worried about like over editing, like taking out the voice or, like there's that fine line, like grammatically correct character voice or author voice, like this is just a stylistic thing that they're wanting to do or is in their work. So that kind of stuff, I sometimes think I wonder if I overthink. So yeah, usually it has to do with client work or getting a piece like done enough, like knowing when to quit editing. I think that's where I start with the overthinking. The drafting part doesn't seem to, I don't overthink the drafting, but I overthink the finishing stuff.
And how do you reconcile that? Like, what have you taught yourself to say, okay, no, I'm done, or this is enough? Like what do you do?
Study nuance in myself. So sometimes I will say, no, step away from the computer. This is good enough. We had this conversation about like perfectionism being the evil of like getting things done. Like you're not going to get it done if you just keep trying to make it better and better and better. And like it's good enough, and that's not selling it short. Like, okay, this is complete. This is the best book that you can produce. And now you're going to put it out in the world, or you're going to send it to the editor or whatever. Like, so sometimes I have to school myself on stepping back and just letting go and being done with it. And that's different than when I've been at the computer too long and I'm like, that's good enough. That's good enough. So knowing the difference between the two, do I need to walk away for a break because I'm no longer doing good work? Or is this no, this is good enough. I'm going to release you into the universe. You know what I mean? So there's a difference. It's the same action. It's the same wording, but it means totally different things. So do I need to like stop for the day because I'm making it worse? Or do I need to like, okay, this is done?
Right. Right. I think there's a point of like, when you say like that nuance, like I really like that, because that's, I think every creative, every person, whether they're creative on a page or whatever, however they're creative, needs that element. And I think it's also like permission to, it's permission to have that internal nuance and recognize it and
Mm-hmm.
say, like, because for me it's the worker bee. It's the worker bee that like takes over. I mean, this was actually happened to me yesterday. Like, I sat down at the cafe. I had two sort of brainstorms to work on, and I had 4 hours to do it, and I got it done in an hour and a half. And then I immediately said, well, what am I going to do now? I got to do something productive. That need to feel productive all the time, even though you've been the outcome shows that you've been as productive as you need to be. The clock maybe doesn't, but that you don't need to be a master. The clock doesn't need to be your master. It's like, it's actually the outcome that you're shooting for. And I think it's a similar case for you. You're shooting for an outcome, knowing when that outcome is there and being happy with it.
Yeah. When you
It's a
talk
super
about the
challenge.
work, it is. And knowing yourself and
Right.
reading your own signals, I think is really key. And that just takes a long time, sometimes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some self-reflective periods.
Yeah.
When you talk about worker bee, my internal worker bee guilt comes from doing things that don't look like work, or don't look like writing, or don't contribute to that output in a direct way, but do, if you go back. So what I mean by that is, research is a easy example. Like, you're
Right.
not making words, but you need to learn this thing first, or, whether that's learning a new software so that you can do this other project, or,
Right.
like, I'm gonna do the audiobook for You Can't Dance a Lie. And the software I'm using currently for audio editing, I don't think is going to be as quality enough for an audiobook as it is for podcasting. So
Right.
I want to use a different one, but there's going to be a learning curve,
Right.
and that's going to take up valuable creative time, but that doesn't mean I'm not working.
Right. Right.
So I have to remember that, or, like, I think it was either Rachel Herron or Jay Thorne's examples on one of their podcasts years ago, where they were like standing in line at the post office to mail books to somebody, either, a customer, or I don't know, a contest or something like that. But
Right.
all that time that they were waiting in line, like, they were feeling guilty, like they're not getting anything accomplished. But that's part of the
Oh,
job, it's
right.
just, it's part of being an author. And this is,
Right.
if you don't have an assistant, like, this is what you do.
Most people don't. Yeah.
So yeah, so giving yourself permission to do all of the parts of your author job, and know that, if you're standing in line at the post office, or you're, buying something for your business, or
Or you're just staring out the window because you're thinking of the next beat
yes,
carefully.
yes.
I watch in parallel play, which takes place on Zoom. As you know, there's a
Mm-hmm.
mosaic of people writing, and I'll sometimes watch what other people are doing. I'm not stalking anybody or doing anything weird, but I'll see people, and they'll just, you'll know the difference between their very intent writing, and then there's just that moment of, and I have a hard time with that moment sometimes, that just, I'm not putting words on the page. I'm not even trying. I'm just letting, calibrating the,
Percolating. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm percolating. I'm doing that. I think that's, look, I worked fast food. That was my first job. I worked at a local fast food place, and there was this manager who used to say, if you've got time to lean, you've got time to clean.
Mm.
And I've always sort of, and it also, from my dad, was also very much like hard work is what you can control. And so you should like always prioritize hardworking. And I think I will always value that. But that whole, you've got time to lean, you've got time to clean is such a, if you can't fill the time with something that looks busy, then you're not doing your job. I often think like maybe some of that leaning time was I just need to reset my brain to go deal with another slew of customers, or somebody just barked at me in the drive-through line and now I need
taking
to
a moment. Yeah.
That leaning time sometimes is, you can't do the clean, you can't do the cleaning. I'm going to stay in that stick there as long as I can, unless you do. And so I had that thought yesterday, like I was done at 3:00. I am not a worker bee all the time. Like if I've accomplished my tasks, if I'm happy with the work that I've created, I can let it go. I can let my writer journey take me home for a little bit of repose or whatever, and maybe be better off the next day. So I see a lot of writers, especially in social media, and social media is such an odd barometer of what is actually in the writing conversation. But I see a lot of writers with that, they're struggling with either finding the time or making use of the time, or, oh no, now I'm at the computer and the words aren't coming. I think that just acknowledging that sometimes if you really only have 500 words in you today, and you feel accomplished getting 500 words down, you did your job. Just because there's another hour on the clock before your spouse comes home or your kids come home doesn't mean you need to fill it. That feeling of satisfaction is really like rare. So I think not overthinking that is a huge victory.
And also taking in consideration your writing process. Some people write their entire books in their heads first. I'm not one of those people.
I want to meet that person. If you're a listener, if you're one of those people, please.
We want to interview you on the podcast.
I'd love to interview you.
The process sounds, really interesting. But when I have heard people talk about their process and that is their process, it does look like there's not a lot going on, like sometimes I have clients where that is, they've been trying to write their book and nothing's coming out, but they're doing all this research. And so we talk about the difference between, is this capital R resistance? Are you just researching because it's easy and fun and you haven't, dipped into the hard stuff of writing? Or is this just your process? You don't know yet. So don't overthink it too much. Go with it, and put
whatever
words on
it
the
looks
page
like
when you can.
Yeah, and the gut says, like, I think the gut knows. Like, I think if you really listen to that like internal nuance, that you'll know, and it's done. It's it's time to walk away. That there's no pushing past that. If you're an author, you can maybe go do author business stuff if that happens to you. You go mail books.
Or read. Reading is part of our job.
That's
if
what
you
I did.
Get done,
that's actually what I did.
Yeah, I'm glad.
I went home and I read Heroic Hearts. I remember this story from when I was an English major. I know there's these two authors. One of them was Ford Madox Ford, the British author. I don't remember who the other author was, but these guys shared a villa for like a summer, and they had like 2 rooms on the side of this courtyard, and they were both writing at the same time. And I'll have to really finish the story by figuring out who the other author was, but they'd have their doors open so they could see each other. And Ford Madox Ford was like, he hammered all day long on his he threw paper away. And the other author would sit in there and he'd drink tea and he'd sit out in the courtyard and he'd have visitors come and he'd feed the birds. He did everything but write. And there was a really great series of letters that they had later on in life when he was like, what were you doing all of that time? You weren't doing anything. You wasted all that time in the villa. And that the other author was like, well, that's when I was dreaming up, his classic novel, right? He was doing that same thing. He was making it all up in his head. He didn't need to do that at the keyboard. If he felt he needed to do it at the keyboard, we'd never have that book. So typewriter wasn't a keyboard, it was a typewriter.
Yeah, filling the creative well looks different for every person too,
Right. And not
So
poisoning your own well. Like, I think sometimes if you overthink things, you can really like short circuit yourself. You know, it can really lead to frustration, and it's unnecessary frustration. That's the way I feel, at least. Like, I don't get frustrated by being different or not fitting some sort of type that you think you should be.
thus the essay instead of the short story.
I knew we'd come back around. See,
Yay!
right, you know who you are, right? And so the next time you have that idea or the need or the desire to fill that anthology space, you know, maybe it will be a short story that time, or maybe not.
Maybe not. We'll see.
Maybe it'll never be the sandbox you play in. I hope it is. It's a fun sandbox. We should talk about short stories, because I have like 2 of them I just finished in the last couple of weeks, and different process for each.
All right. That sounds like a fun topic. We'll add that to the list.
Add it to the list.
Thanks for coming up with this topic, Eric. It was really interesting.
Yeah, you're
I'm
welcome. It
glad
was fun talking about it.
it was. All right. Well, I hope that was useful to you listeners, and we will see you next week for our 100th episode.
Wow. Our podcast is, if it were years, would be mentioned on the Today Show in the morning. Remember how they used to have like they'd have the birthdays for the 100-year-old people, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it was like I forgot the guy's name. He'd get out there, he'd be like, "Oh, look, she looks, you know, doesn't look a day over 50. Hey," you know, all the old charming guy things. Like, so I'll get in touch with the Today Show and we'll get on there.
Okay. Right
Yeah,
on.
that'll be good.
Happy writing, everyone. See you next week.
Take care.